Hey everyone, and welcome to Mini Scroll, the daily internet culture podcast bringing you the biggest stories from social media, the creator economy, and the digital space every Monday through Thursday and sometimes Fridays. My name is Annabelle, and I am your Wednesday Mini Tech Scroll host, and also the deputy editor of Australian youth digital media brand Centennial World. Welcome back to Mini Tech Scroll. I just need to say before we get into this episode, this is a TikTok only episode. We had one last year that was all about the US TikTok ban, and it appears the time has come once again where there is just so much TikTok news related to US TikTok that we simply have no time to cover any other story. So if you aren't interested in everything going on with TikTok in the US this week, definitely come back next week because hopefully we will get back to our regular scheduled programming. But before we get into the breakdown, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And yes, let's just get into it because we have a lot to get through. So there are definitely multiple concurrent stories all happening at the same time. So I'm really going to do my best to try and break it down for you in a succinct and comprehensive way. But of course, before we begin, I just want to put a preface out there that we are obviously not based in the US. My TikTok account is not a US TikTok account. So a lot of the issues that are being reported and discussed aren't necessarily what we are experiencing right now down in Australia. So just putting that out there for your knowledge. Let's take it back to the end of last week when it was officially announced that the Trump administration had closed the deal with TikTok that would allow the US to control their own version of the platform. We have spoken about this many times. And when I say many times, the TikTok ban in the US has become a main character in the Mini Tech Scroll cinematic universe. It came up at least once a month last year, it feels like. And the more it came up, the more I feel like I was visibly annoyed that I had to talk about it, simply because it just always came up and I wanted to report on something new. But of course, we cannot ignore the news. So here we are once again. If you are a new listener, I will give some context here, but it's not going to be nearly as much context as I've given in the past. So feel free to check out previous episodes. But basically, this new deal that the Trump administration has struck with TikTok and ByteDance all came out of the TikTok ban legislation that had passed in April 2024 under the Biden administration. So this legislation essentially banned TikTok from operating in the US unless a deal was struck for a US-approved buyer or buyers to purchase the app, and ByteDance, which is TikTok's Chinese-owned parent company, which I'm sure we all know, divested. And this was all positioned out of security concerns about what ByteDance and TikTok could glean about American users. And while it was positioned as a national security issue, many people have pushed back on that, saying that other big tech companies in the United States do the exact same thing with their user data. And on top of this, there are a lot of questions about free speech and censorship and what would happen if TikTok was banned in the US, but we will get into more of that discussion later. So after years of push and pull negotiations between the US government and ByteDance, in the second half of last year, we started to get glimpses of what was to come. So in July, we reported on a scoop from The Information claiming that there would be a new TikTok for US-based users ahead of a potential sale. And then around September, October, it was revealed that a consortium of US investors would be leading the new US venture. And this list of US investors seemed very curated, with virtually all of them aligning with MAGA or Donald Trump's political agenda in one way or another. So, as I've already mentioned, last week it was announced that a deal had officially been reached. As US President Donald Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social, which is his social media app, quote, "I am so happy to have helped in saving TikTok. It will now be owned by a group of great American patriots and investors, the biggest in the world, and will be an important voice. Along with other factors, it was responsible for my doing so well with the youth vote in the 2024 presidential election. I only hope that long into the future, I will be remembered by those who use and love TikTok." Firstly, I just need to say, I'm sorry if I sounded uncomfortable reading that. That was extremely difficult for me to read, simply because of the cadence that is written in. I found it really difficult. But as far as what he said in that announcement. This alludes to something that I have been saying for ages. I'm pretty sure if you went back to the episode I did exclusively on TikTok last year, I would have said a similar thing. Trump initially was the person who was leading the calls for a TikTok ban back in 2020. And I think this announcement shows part of the reason why he changed his tune to help TikTok, and that was simply because it helped him win the election. And when something benefits him or someone is nice to Trump, he tends to change his perception of that person or platform in this case. So this is a pattern of behavior that we do tend to see with him often. And that is why I was never fully convinced that TikTok would be banned in the US. On January 23rd, TikTok also released a statement announcing the joint venture had been reached and offered a little bit more detail, including that, quote, TikTok USDS joint venture has 3 managing investors, Silver Lake, Oracle, and MGX, each holding 15%. And we have spoken about this in a previous episode because there were a lot of leaks around the potential investors. But for those who weren't here for that, this is a little bit more context on who and what these companies are. So Oracle Cloud Services have been storing US TikTok data since 2020 at this point. And Larry Ellison is a co-founder of Oracle and also the chief technology officer, and he is a significant Trump supporter for reference. Next is Silver Lake, which is a private equity company, and lastly is MGX, which is a Abu Dhabi state-owned tech investment firm, which I've noted before is kind of interesting considering there's a lot of concern around foreign data collection of users. And obviously, that is what led to the TikTok ban in the first place. So many commentators / internet users have noted that it feels perhaps hypocritical that another foreign entity is now involved. But speaking of foreign entities, ByteDance will still hold a 19.9% stake in the company, which is in line with the divest or ban law that went into effect initially. With this new leadership, the joint venture will, quote, retrain, test, and update the content recommendation algorithm on US user data, per the statement from TikTok. And how this is working is that ByteDance is leasing the algorithm to the US venture because the algorithm was the sticky point of negotiation. ByteDance didn't want to sell it, but the US didn't want ByteDance to necessarily have access. So through ByteDance leasing the algorithm to this US version of TikTok, this is why a retraining process will take place. And according to American users, things have already shifted on the app, which obviously might seem quite quick, but as Ryan Broderick wrote in a recent edition of the Garbage Day newsletter, quote, normally I would say that it would take a considerable amount of time to completely overhaul the algorithm for a site like TikTok. But now that we've seen how fast X, formerly Twitter, changes due to the whims of its own mad king, Elon Musk, I wouldn't say it's totally impossible. And that brings us to the next part of the story of everything going on with TikTok. And Lauren alluded to this yesterday, but there have been many calls from US-based TikTok users, both celebrities and regular people, alleging that a kind of censorship has begun on the platform. Of course, censorship on TikTok or suppression or being shadow banned, quote unquote, is not new. That is why many people have been speaking in algo speak for years now, but this seems to be different according to these users. For instance, Billie Eilish famously took to Instagram with a video posted by her brother, which basically denounced everything horrible that has been happening in the US with ICE, writing, quote, TikTok is silencing people, by the way. And she showed a screenshot of Phineas's videos and how it had just over 100 likes, which is not the usual amount of engagement that a video from someone of Phineas's celebrity, I guess, would get on TikTok. Aside from Billie, actress and comedian Megan Stalter also shared that she would be deleting TikTok considering these recent developments. As she wrote on her Instagram story, quote, hi, so today I'll be downloading my videos and deleting my TikTok page. TikTok is under new ownership and we are being completely censored and monitored. I'm unable to upload anything about ICE, even after I tried to trick the page by making it look like a comedy video. Let's delete the app. Love you. So those are just 2 examples, but I have seen countless people go to different platforms questioning why their content isn't getting views or being uploaded. I've even seen people sharing other topics that are being seemingly suppressed, including Epstein, which is of course a sore point for Trump and his allies at the moment. I should add here, though, that The Verge did do some investigation about whether Epstein was actually being suppressed, noting that the situation does seem to be a little bit more complicated. As Richard Lawler writes, quote, testing it from our end showed that TikTok's messaging feature bans many innocuous single-word messages, like test. Using the convicted sex offender's name in a sentence, however, goes through unbanned. This is obviously something that we can't confirm or deny, and I doubt it's something that the platform would confirm or deny either, that the audience would take as truth. I will say that ever since the rumored investors were announced, there has been significant concern about the freedom of speech on a platform led by this group of investors of a specific political leaning, so it seems. And I remember posing whether this is a way to further isolate American users from global discourse and perceptions. Going into this new era of TikTok, that is definitely something that is on people's minds. While some TikTok users are convinced that we are witnessing censorship in real time, it does seem to have coincided with an alleged power outage of a data center, one that has caused a whole host of issues on the platform. A series of updates have been posted on the newly created X account for the joint venture. As one post shared yesterday read, quote, since yesterday, we've been working to restore our services following a power outage at a US data center impacting TikTok and other apps we operate. We're working with our data center partner to stabilize our service. We're sorry for the disruption and hope to resolve it soon. Another post ended up noting some of the bugs/glitches users could be facing, which included slower load times, creators seeing 0 views or less views or likes on their content, as well as timed out requests. A lot of users were still skeptical about this reasoning, alleging that certain topics, including videos about ICE, were disproportionately affected. And I do feel like for something like this, the best thing for TikTok to probably do would be to release some kind of public deep dive into everything that went wrong, because that would be the way, I guess, to maybe regain trust, if that's even possible with the users. So I guess we'll wait and see how much detail they end up giving on this data center outage. But the latest update on the glitch was shared at 10:40 Eastern Time, and it read, quote, we've made significant progress in recovering our US infrastructure with our US data center partner. However, the US user experience may still have some technical issues, including when posting new content. We're committed to bringing TikTok back to its full capacity as soon as possible. We'll continue to provide updates. Thank you for your patience. I can definitely understand that we have to give the platform some time to really understand how this new leadership will change TikTok, but there have already been some other developments that have immediately turned people off and sparked panic. So this is I guess the third part of this story. But TikTok has reportedly updated its privacy policy, where American users started seeing a pop-up message last week asking them to agree to new terms. There has been a lot of discourse on social media pointing to the language in the new privacy policy, specifically that TikTok can collect sensitive information if you do agree to it, which might include a user's, quote, sexual life or sexual orientation, status as transgender or non-binary, citizenship, or immigration status. That is, of course, confronting to read, especially in the current political climate in the United States between the ICE raids that have been happening and, of course, the increasing anti-transgender policies and rhetoric that have emerged over the past few years. But it also should be noted that this language isn't new. As Sarah Perez reports for TechCrunch, quote, the same language appeared in TikTok's privacy policy before the ownership deal closed, and is primarily there to comply with state privacy laws, like California's Consumer Privacy Act, which requires companies to agree to disclose to consumers what sensitive information is collected. Similar disclosures appear in other social media apps' policies. I did double check this, by the way, and in an older version of the privacy policy that you can access through the Wayback Machine, you can see that this language is still there, and the version that I saw was from 2024, so clearly before the new leadership took their role. Although there have been other changes to the privacy policy that have sparked concern, including the fact that TikTok will now be tracking precise GPS-derived location data of its users. It will also be collecting/storing AI interactions, as well as expanding its advertising policies, which will basically allow the platform to target US users with relevant ads outside of TikTok. Wired actually published a really good piece just comparing the language before and after the privacy policy update, so I will link that if you want to see the differences. As you probably would have expected, all of these changes and developments have led to businesses and users starting to boycott this new iteration of TikTok. And with that, they are moving to various competitors. According to data reported by CNBC from the market intelligence firm Sensor Tower, TikTok users have been deleting the app, or uninstalling the app, I should say, at significantly high rates since the US operation begun. As the article notes, quote, the daily average of US users deleting the TikTok app has increased nearly 150% over the past 5 days compared to the previous 3 months. So that is definitely significant, I would say. And there have been a couple of platforms that US users seem to be turning to, with one called UpScrolled seemingly being the most popular. It actually isn't exactly like TikTok. Like its interface is not like a For You page. It feels a little bit closer to Twitter, where you can post text posts, videos, or photos. And it's actually an Australian platform, which I thought was interesting, and was founded by a man named Issam Hijazi. So since UpScrolled has started to gain traction, I have seen that a couple high-profile figures have joined, including internet culture journalist, tech journalist Taylor Lorenz. But the app still does feel very new and is definitely working to manage the influx of new users. On other social media platforms, the UpScrolled team has repeatedly asked users to, quote, bear with us as they adjust, which is definitely fair because some crazy stats have emerged about how many people have turned to UpScrolled in just the past week. TechCrunch reported that UpScroll's daily installs increased by 2,850% since Thursday last week, and it's currently sitting at roughly around 140,000 downloads all up. So that is quite a lot of people moving to the app. But there are some other apps I've seen gaining traction, including one called Skylight, which is reportedly built on open source technology. And since the US TikTok deal has been finalized, the platform has reportedly reached 380,000 users. Another one I've seen people talk about is Monnett, I believe, which is an European alternative. But all in all, I would say that UpScrolled is the app that people are talking about the most. So that brings us to a couple of questions, like what does this all mean? What can we take away from this? What can we expect from this US version of TikTok moving forward? And I am always cautious of making predictions, especially at this point, because it is so early to say what will happen. But I think the first question here is, will users actually continue to use these alternative platforms? This is, of course, not the first time that there has been a mass exodus or conversation around US TikTok. And the obvious point of comparison is RedNote, which is the Chinese-owned app that many US users turned to when TikTok went dark at the beginning of last year. Of course, the move to RedNote didn't actually last very long because when TikTok came back online, many users returned. I will say, though, this does feel like a very different situation to the RedNote situation, but I have always been quite skeptical of one singular app completely replacing TikTok, because that is a massive ask. If you think about how many features TikTok offers, the amount of content on there, the amount of subcultures on there, I think it's extremely difficult to replicate on another app. But aside from TikTok specifically, I think there are two issues with this idea of one app replacing TikTok. The first is that I think it's quite difficult to actually convince users to leave one platform for another. I will say, though, that the change in leadership might be enough for a lot of TikTok users, because TikTok does veer somewhat left-wing compared to other major social media platforms. And I have cited this data before, but the Pew Research Center did research in 2024 into newsfluencers and found that TikTok was the only platform where left-leaning political ideology surpassed its right-wing counterpart among these kinds of creators. And I think that is kind of emblematic of the platform at large. And obviously, this new ownership doesn't necessarily align with these values. But the second thing that makes it really hard for this platform switch is that even when users are convinced to leave a platform, the new app has to develop a culture that resonates with these users and makes it enjoyable and fun to use. And I think that is where it's really difficult. I think we've seen that a little bit with Blue Sky and X, for example, because while a lot of people have boycotted X, Blue Sky hasn't really managed to develop its own kind of culture. But I also think, I guess, that comes with time. I should add that I don't know how helpful it is to make the TikTok and X comparison, even though I just did it. Because while Twitter was influential, I don't think it ever had the same stronghold that TikTok does have on internet culture and content consumption. Twitter always felt a little bit more for hard news or specific subcultures, and also the content format is different, so I just think it manifests differently. So even though that comparison might not be entirely helpful, I do think it's probably one of the closest ones that we have. I feel like I'm just contradicting myself left, right, and center right now. Aside from this, I do think there is one part of the conversation that's often missed about people actually using these alternative platforms, and it is a question of logistics. Can these new apps handle the amount of content and users that may flock to them from TikTok? I mean, we're already seeing UpScrolled struggle with that. And the user experience would definitely play a role in whether or not these users stick around. And I think my last point in this ramble about the likelihood of people continuing to use these alternative platforms is that this has come at quite a unique time culturally, where the pursuit of being chronically offline, or at least performing it to your followers, is at an all-time high with the going analog trend. And if you want more discourse on this, check out the deep dive coming on Friday. That is all I will say on that, because this is literally what we're covering in the deep dive, and we worked hard, so please tune in. But all in all, whether people continue to use these new platforms does depend on how the new US TikTok operates and what the algorithm prioritizes, of course. And between the power outage and all the glitches, I do think it is difficult to say for sure that the type of content that is allegedly being suppressed is because of the new owners, or if content is just kind of being suppressed across the board at this moment in time. However, do I think there is a chance of this political censorship actually happening down the line? Sure. And I've said this before, especially when we consider the way the current US administration values and uses social media. They're not necessarily open to differences of opinion or messaging that maybe misaligns with their political agenda. So it's easy to see how that would trickle down to allies. And if that does turn out to be the case, internet culture and politics is going to change as we know it, especially when we consider how much of an engine TikTok has been, especially for youth audiences since 2020. So I guess we're just gonna have to stay tuned. I'm definitely curious to hear what you guys think of all this, whether you're based in the US or not, because I just gave a lot of unsolicited commentary considering I'm not based in the US. But that is everything for Mini Tech Scroll today. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Lauren will speak to you guys tomorrow. And like I mentioned at the top of the episode, hopefully next week we will be back for a regular Mini Tech episode of different stories. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Centennial World Podcast Network operates on Gadigal land. We would like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay our respects to elders both past and present.